On World News Tonight, winter worries. Ukraine braces for cold temperatures amidst power outages and Russian attacks. Climate concerns. The UN COP27 kicks off with key figures urging for concrete actions over awareness calls. Midterm hopes. Republicans and Democrats see intense rallying for the final stretch before voting begins. And spooky celebrations. Drones put on a high-flying show with all things Halloween.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here's Danidu Witanawasam.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us on World News. We start off tonight with the updates on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Ukraine continues to hold its ground against Russian troops, with the forces causing heavy losses to incoming enemy forces. However, there are fears of renewed assault in occupied regions.
Russian forces are suffering heavy losses amid an assault in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. That's according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Sunday, who in his nightly address warned that Russia may be concentrating its forces for renewed attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Zelensky's warning comes as the 9-month war may be entering a period of stalemate as winter weather sets in. Ukrainian forces in the southern front have been tightening their grip on the Russian-held city of Kherson, but have so far not been able to advance into that city. Following a series of military setbacks, Russian forces have increasingly targeted Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, bombarding power plants that provide electricity and heat ahead of winter. Over the weekend, the Washington Post reported that the United States is privately encouraging Kyiv to signal an openness to negotiate with Moscow. Citing unnamed sources, the newspaper said the message from American officials was not aimed at pushing Ukraine toward the negotiating table with the Russian aggressor, but a calculated move, appearing open to peace talks to maintain the support of other nations. The Post reported U.S. and Ukrainian officials acknowledged that Zelensky's ban on talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin had generated concern in parts of Europe, Africa, and Latin America, where the war's effect on the cost of food and fuel are felt most sharply. The White House National Security Council had no immediate comment on the accuracy of the report. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said during a visit to Kyiv last week that Washington's support for Ukraine would remain, quote, unwavering and unflinching, and laying the blame for the conflict squarely on Putin.
This war could end very easily. Russia chose to start it. Russia could choose to end it by ceasing its attack on Ukraine, ceasing its occupation of Ukraine, and that's precisely what it should do from our perspective.
The United States announced $400 million worth of additional security assistance for Ukraine, including refurbishing tanks from the Czech Republic and missiles for air defenses that could be used against Russian drones and cruise missiles. The new help brought the amount of U.S. military aid sent to Kyiv to more than $18.2 billion since the invasion.
More news on the conflict. A winter without power or water is what awaits residents in Kyiv, according to latest predictions from the country's military forces. This comes following heavily targeted attacks by Russia on power stations.
Kyiv's mayor is warning that full power outages could hit the Ukrainian capital, and residents will have to evacuate in the absolute worst-case scenario. He says the city faces cuts to water supplies and heating too, as Russia ramps up its strikes on the power grid. In an interview with state television, Vitaly Klitschko said residents should conserve supplies but not to worry just yet. We are doing everything so that this does not happen. But let's be honest, our enemies are doing everything to keep the city without heat, electricity and water, and for us all to die. This is their task. The future of the country and the future of each of us depends on how prepared we are for various situations. In recent weeks, millions of Ukrainians have intermittently been left without electricity and water. Rolling power cuts are also in place to avoid overloads and to allow for repairs.
The controversial drone deal that occurred between Russia and Iran has been acknowledged by the Iranian government. However, officials claim the provisions of drones took place before the invasion of Russia into the Ukrainian territory.
Iran acknowledged for the first time on Saturday that it had supplied Russia with drones, but said they were sent a few months before Moscow's forces invaded Ukraine. Speaking at a summit in Tehran, Iran's foreign minister denied Tehran was continuing to supply drones. In recent weeks, Ukraine has reported a surge in drone attacks on civilian infrastructure, notably targeting power stations and dams, using Iranian-made drones. Russia, which calls its invasion a special military operation, denies its forces have used Iranian drones to attack Ukraine. The European Union and Britain have sanctioned Iran over drone deliveries to Russia. Meanwhile, Ukraine's besieged eastern city of Bakhmut is now the most intense frontline in the war. That's according to Alexander Marchenko, the deputy head of the Bakhmut civil administration.
Unfortunately, the enemy is trying to storm the city from several directions. There is ongoing fighting on the outskirts of the city. Ukrainian armed forces are firmly holding the front line and are not allowing the enemy to advance deeper and enter the city.
Russian forces have repeatedly launched attacks against Bakhmut in the Donetsk region, but are being pushed back with what Kiev says are heavy losses. The city has already been without electricity, gas and running water for nearly 2 months. Marchenko said more than 120 people had been killed within the city limits since February. But that despite the daily crossfire, around 12 to 15,000 civilians remain in the city. He added that evacuations have not stopped since February 27th, and the city's administration is encouraging people to leave.
The UN Climate Change Conference kicked off in Egypt with ways to tackle climate change being discussed. Delegates and NGOs from some 200 countries are participating in COP27, which runs through November 18th.
The 27th Annual UN Climate Change Conference, or COP27, began on Sunday in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. This year's conference will focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and overseeing the effective adoption of policies aimed at fighting climate change. Among issues being addressed this year is the action needed to respond to record-breaking weather conditions such as drought, heat waves, and floods around the world.
The cascading risks are also clear. So this conference must be about concrete action.
Climate compensation for developing countries will also be on the agenda. This refers to the idea of loss and damage, which suggests that countries contributing most to global warming should pay developing countries that are vulnerable to climate disasters. During last year's conference in Glasgow, the world's climate leaders pledged to phase down coal. However, things haven't been improved. According to the energy think tank Amber, coal power generation had increased about 1% on year by August 2022. This was due to greater coal use in Europe as Russia stopped supplying natural gas to countries in the region. Also, China increased coal consumption following a historic summer drought that hindered the operation of hydroelectric power plants.
COP27 must lay the foundations for much faster, bolder climate action now and in these crucial decades, when the global climate fight will be won or lost.
World leaders from 80 countries, including U.S. President Joe Biden and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, are set to attend the climate conference. Na Kyung-won, South Korea's newly appointed special ambassador for climate change, will also be there as South Korea's presidential envoy. Delegates and NGOs from some 200 countries are participating in COP27, which runs through November 18th.
Now, South Korea's Air Force scrambled stealth fighters after an unusually large number of North Korean warplanes were in the air for hours. The regime appears to have carried out such acts in protest of Seoul and Washington's decision to extend large-scale combined aerial drills.
South Korea's military said Friday that it detected around 180 tracks of North Korean warplanes for about 4 hours. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., the North's warplanes were seen flying in various areas inland and along the regime's eastern and western coasts. Although they were flying in the North's territory, what was unusual was how many jets were dispatched. In response, South Korea's Air Force also had about 80 of its own F-35A fighters in the air to make sure the North's warplanes didn't cross the border. Seoul's JCS explained that 240 warplanes involved in the aerial military drills with the U.S. are still separately conducting exercises as planned and are maintaining strong readiness. The North's latest activities appear to be a protest against the decision made by South Korea and the U.S. the day before to extend the aerial drills that have been taking place since Monday because of the regime's continued provocations. The Vigilant Storm exercise has been extended by a day and will continue until Saturday. A senior military official from North Korea had warned in a statement that the decision to extend was an enormous mistake that would spark an uncontrollable phase. This also comes less than a day after the North fired yet more missiles and artillery rounds on Thursday night. At around 9:30 p.m. on Thursday, North Korea fired 3 short-range ballistic missiles toward waters off its east coast. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the missiles flew 490 kilometers at a speed of Mach 6. The military condemned the North and urged it to immediately halt its provocations, saying they pose a serious threat to the peace and security of the Korean Peninsula, as well as the international community. But the North didn't stop there, as it fired about 80 artillery rounds 2 hours later, again toward the East Sea. Seoul's military said the shells landed in the maritime buffer zones, set to ease military tensions by an inter-Korean agreement signed in 2018. Amid heightening tensions starting next Monday, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff plans to hold this year's Taeguk exercise aimed at enhancing operational capability to counter North Korea's various nuclear and missile threats.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. Now, in the race to the final voting of the US midterms, both President Biden and former President Trump rallied across swinger states to rack up the maximum possible number of votes for their respective candidates.
I know Pennsylvania well, and John Fetterman is Pennsylvania. He is Pennsylvania.
U.S. President Joe Biden over the weekend blitzed through electoral battlegrounds in the final days before the November 8 midterm elections. In Pennsylvania, he joined former President Barack Obama in support of Democratic candidates for governor and the U.S. Senate, in hopes that this level of star power might sway enough voters to win races in the swing state.
But the power of America is in your hands. It really is.
Both the current and former Democratic presidents doubled down on Republican candidates in the state who reject the results of the 2020 presidential election and were, in their words, dangerous to democracy.
Truth and facts and logic and reason and basic decency are on the ballot. Democracy itself is on the ballot. The stakes are high.
You know, they had a little rally here. Nobody showed up for their rally. Look at this rally.
But Republicans trotted out their own star, former President Donald Trump, who campaigned in Pennsylvania Saturday to shore up GOP candidates. The ex-president derided the Democratic candidates and teased his own potential bid for the White House.
Ooh, look at all of them. They must think I'm going to announce for president, and that's a lot. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people.
In recent weeks, electoral momentum has shifted toward the Republicans after Democrats saw a boost of voter enthusiasm around the issue of defending abortion rights over the summer. But Democratic strategists acknowledge that voters' concerns about inflation and crime have returned to focus. Democrats' early lead in several Senate races, including contests in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada, have shrunk or evaporated completely in recent weeks. Nonpartisan election forecasts and polls show Republicans are heavy favorites to win control in the House of Representatives, with the Senate a toss-up. Control of even one of those chambers would give Republicans the power to block Biden's legislative agenda and launch potentially damaging investigations.
Now, 2 German-run migrant rescue ships carrying nearly 300 rescued people waiting off the eastern coast of Sicily, one with permission to disembark the most vulnerable migrants, while the other's request for a safe port has gone unanswered, despite critical conditions on board.
Italy has finally allowed a rescue ship carrying 179 refugees and migrants to enter a port in Sicily. The vessel, Humanity 1, is run by a German charity. Minors will be the first to leave, while adults will remain on board to undergo a medical examination. We are equally concerned about the conditions of other migrants, this activist says, because there's evidence of delays in the allocation of reception centres. It was heartbreaking and inhumane to see their conditions when we rescued them. And for this reason, we ask the Prefecture, the Ministry of Interior and the Italian government to immediately assign various hospitality centres. About 30 migrants have been refused permission to leave the ship. The measures are in line with the new policy announced by Italy's Interior Minister. Several more vessels holding almost 1,000 migrants have been at sea for more than a week, awaiting permission to dock.
A passenger plane crash in Tanzania has left dozens dead. The crash occurred while the plane was attempting to land at an airport in the vicinity.
At least 19 people died when a passenger plane crashed into Lake Victoria in North Tanzania on Sunday while trying to land at a nearby airport. That's according to authorities, who gave the revised number after just 3 deaths were reported earlier. Flight PW494, operated by Precision Air, hit the water during storms and heavy rain. The wreckage could be seen almost fully submerged as rescuers in boats rushed to pull out trapped passengers. This rescuer said water surged in after the emergency door was opened, making it difficult for people to escape the plane. Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa visited the crash site and said authorities were trying to figure out who was missing from the list of passenger names. Precision Air said the plane was carrying 39 passengers, including an infant, as well as 4 crew members. The 2 pilots initially survived the crash and were in touch with rescue workers from the cockpit, authorities said, but they later reported their oxygen supply was dwindling and had died by the time rescuers reached them. The 2 flight attendants survived. CEO Patrick Wanry said the airline has set up family assistance centres to provide information and will continue to offer support to the victims and their families. Tanzania's largest privately owned airline said in a statement the plane left the commercial capital Dar es Salaam and crash-landed just before 9 a.m. local time Sunday as it was approaching Bukoba Airport.
Now, Ghana's capital saw over 1,000 demonstrators gathering to call for the end of President Nana Akufo-Addo's reign due to economic collapse in the country, deepening further through financial mishandling.
Marching through Accra on Saturday, protesters feeling the weight of Ghana's economic collapse called for President Nana Akufo-Addo's resignation.
He has failed and we are asking him to resign. High fuel price increment is killing the people of Ghana.
Fuel and food costs have spiraled to record levels, with inflation topping 37% in September, a 21-year high. Meanwhile, Ghana's currency, the cedi, has plummeted 40% against the dollar this year. Akufo-Addo sought to reassure Ghanaians last week, saying authorities would get the country's finances back on track. The government is in talks with the International Monetary Fund for billions of dollars to prop up the economy. But protesters are dismissive of the move.
We are speaking to the IMF. They shouldn't give them loan. They shouldn't give them. Enough is enough. We have gold. We have oil. We have manganese. We have diamond. We have everything in this country. It's the only thing that we need is leadership.
Welcome back. For more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. Twitter updated its app in Apple's App Store to begin charging $8 a month for the sought-after blue check verification marks in Elon Musk's first major revision of the social media platform. Aaron Carter, who won early fame as a child pop star and toured with his brother's hit band Backstreet Boys before pursuing careers in rap and acting, was found dead in his home near Los Angeles at the age of 34. Dozens have been killed in Syria following the shelling of a displaced residents' camp in rebel-held territory. Some 30 rockets were fired by the Syrian government, leaving over 70 injured. New cases in COVID-19 reported in China rose to the highest number seen in 6 months, with the health officials having said they were sticking with the zero-COVID policy that sowed serious doubts about the country's economy. Heavy rains caused landslides and destroyed at least 70 houses in northern Colombia. The houses collapsed after more than 24 hours of heavy rains and 82 families were evacuated from the disaster site. Well, that is all from us here at World News Tonight. Join us again tomorrow as we keep you up to date with the latest from around the world. In case you missed any of the stories tonight, you can watch the whole program on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/otherderana English. We leave you tonight with high-flying drones that put on a dazzling display of Halloween-themed attractions. Thank you for watching. Good night.